to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are we on? Oh, we are on. I can hear that. Mandy, would you please call the roll?
Here.
Yes.
Yes.
Carlstone,
Yes.
Hopkins,
Here.
Spore.
Here.
For those of you attending via the telephone, you will be able to provide verbal comments during the dedicated public forums and public hearings. I would ask that you would please keep your microphones and telephones on mute till the time you wish to speak. Can I get a motion for approval of the tentative agenda?
So moved. Support.
Vance or DeYoung, any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeAnstruck,
Yes.
DeYoung,
Yes.
Reindeerhorst,
Yes.
Carlstone,
Yes.
Hopkins,
Yes.
Spore.
Yes.
I would like to reappoint Darrell Gates to serve a second term on the Library Board of Trustees. Darrell previously served on the board from July 2002 to June of 2008. He attended 18 of the 19 meetings held since he rejoined the board in 2020. If approved, his second term would expire June 30, 2025. Can I get a motion for approval?
So moved.
Support.
Is that Hopkins, Spore? Any discussion?
Were there any other applications submitted?
There was one submitted like this weekend or Monday maybe.
And there's no thought to tabling it so you could review it?
No.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Hopkins,
Yes.
Spore,
Yes.
DeYoung,
Yes.
Reindeerhorst,
Yes.
DeAnstruck,
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Motion passed. I would like to reappoint Susie Card to serve a second term on the Library Board of Trustees. Susie is the UNISERV Director for the Iowa State Education Association and a former teacher. Susie attended 29 of the 35 meetings held since she joined the board in 2019. If approved, Susie's second term would expire June 30, 2025. Can I get a motion for approval?
So moved. Support.
DeYoung, Hopkins, discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeYoung,
Yes.
Hopkins,
Yes.
Spore,
Yes.
Reindeerhorst,
Yes.
DeAnstruck,
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Motion passed. Okay, we have time for public forum. Anyone wishing to address council regarding any items on the agenda? If you want to, please come to the mic, state your name and address. Try to limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Does this consider the ordinance with the pool to talk now, or do we wait till later?
No, you can do that now. That's on the agenda, yes.
I wasn't sure which way that went.
Yeah, any, this time is for agenda items, and that's on the agenda, yes.
My name is Karma Ruthven, 300 West 5th Street here in Pella. I was going to talk a couple weeks ago in regards to it, and I didn't get it done. But anyway, my concern or my comment that I wanted to make was in regards to the pool ordinance, the wording and stuff that you've kind of been hesitant about. My notice was that the chief of police had okayed how it was written, and so did the city lawyer. Now, I think it's disrespectful to go over them in regards to their thinking that it was all okay. And in regards to the word buttocks, that is medically why that term is used, and it's more of a proper word to use than bottom or butt. So I just think it was wrong that the ordinance was passed, that Calvin had asked to waive the second and third reading, and you guys, no. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Anyone else?
1546 Pleasant Drive. So just for clarification's sake, Mayor, so when we have people that are interested in the library board positions, when is the last day that they can fill out an application?
Mandy, I don't know that there, I mean, once you fill out an application, then we know you're interested, so whenever there's an appointment, potentially could be considered.
Okay.
I mean,
so-
people come up to me and say, hey, I'm interested in whatever boards, and so I keep them in mind. Or else I reach out to people that maybe I think would be good for a particular board. So I don't think there's time.
Okay.
Once you make application, you're in there, and potentially could be talked to about filling an open position.
So the fact that you chose these two, which is obviously your decision, and that's fine. But you had mentioned there was one on Friday and then one again.
Yeah, I was out of town Friday. I was in northern Minnesota fishing till late today, and so I didn't know anything about it till late today. But I chose these two. I mean, I put these two up for reappointment. Obviously, the council has to approve it, so.
Okay. All right. Well, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
My name is Gregory David Flusher. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, but I'm in the process of changing it to Liam Vanover for obvious reasons. That was a joke, supposed to be funny. Okay, can I play something real quick or read from this? Because I didn't have time to write it down. Take me 1 second. Daniel Byrne was an architect from Chicago, and he had a saying that was really smarter than anything I could come up with. So let me see if I can find it. Oh, got the things nailed down. Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood, and probably will not themselves be realized. Make big plans, aim high, and hope at work, remembering that a noble, logical diagram, once recorded, will never die, but long after we are gone, will be a living thing, asserting itself with ever-growing insistency. My idea is for a fundraising event, series of events actually, to offset the expenditures of previous agendas, including the tennis court, whatever you want to call it, the tennis court stuff that's going on. I humbly propose that those in leadership positions be as ambitious in fundraising decisions as they are in expenditures. And I detail this in this little handout thing. And with that, I conclude. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? All right, moving on. Can I get a motion for approval of the consent agenda?
So moved.
Banster to Young. Any discussion? All in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeAnstrom,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Vanderhorst,
Yes.
Carl Stones,
Yes.
Hopkins,
Yes.
Spore.
Yes.
Motion passed. Okay, public hearing on budget amendment number 1 for the fiscal year 21-22 budget. Mike?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to explain this item. For those following at home, I'm on slide number 3 this evening. And as council is well aware, but for members in the audience and those following at home, but maybe not so much, we typically hold one budget amendment on an annual basis. And usually what this amendment is addressed to is timing differences in the city budget. So in other words, what we're talking about is items that may have been budgeted in previous fiscal years, the expenditures taking place this fiscal year or vice versa on items. So generally there's a lot of movement within the various line items to account for projects. This line item is no different than previous years that we've had. Now overall, when we take a look at this amendment, it's very important to note that overall the amendment calls for a net decrease in fund balance of the city of just over $4.2 million. And we'll cover that a little bit later in detail on this as well. But when we look at the total revenue sources that will be increased as a result of this amendment, we're just approaching $7.2 million. Expenses are just right at 11.4 million for a net decrease in fund balance of 4.2 million. Now that was the Reader's Digest version of the expenditures that we had to consider all on detail in the packet, and I'd be more than happy to explain or address any questions council may have on the various components that make up budget amendment number 1. The important point to keep in mind with this is when we look at our ending fund balance of this year, we expect that the city, when we look at the cash balances for the city of Pella, to be somewhere right around a $26 million fund balance. That's a projected increase of upwards of 21 million when we started this budget year and what we had projected. So overall, while this amendment is a decrease, overall the projected fund balance is going to be an increase for the city of Pella at the end of the year. So once again, Mr. Mayor, that was a very quick overview on this item. I'd be more than happy to explain or address any questions the mayor and council may have on this item.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Any written comments, Mandy?
No written comments.
Council, any comments, questions?
The only one that I had was on the hotel motel tax that went up on both of it, and I assume that's because we got more revenue and then we had more expense go out.
Yes.
And I thought that would be at the 57%, but maybe there's timing in months where that screws up that math too, because it was quite a bit more than 57%.
Yeah, that's a good point. We had a one-time contribution, I think, to the hotel or to the CBD of $30,000 too, if I remember correctly, back when there was a shortfall, I believe. So that's probably a result of that.
That's included in the expenditure
Yes.
side? Not,
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
Anything else? Okay, any comments from any audience member concerning this item? Okay, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Banstra, Hopkins, any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call roll.
Banstra?
Yes.
Hopkins?
Yes.
Score?
Yes.
DeYoung?
Yes.
Vanderhorst?
Yes.
Carlstone?
Yes.
Motion passed. Resolution number 6435, entitled Resolution Amending the Fiscal Year 21-22 Annual Budget by Adopting Budget Amendment Number 1. Sure, nothing to add, right, Mike?
You're correct, sir.
Can I get a motion for approval?
So moved.
Support.
DeYoung, Branderhorst, any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeYoung?
Yes.
Vanderhorst?
Yes.
Banstra?
Yes.
Carlstone?
Yes.
Hopkins?
Yes.
Score?
Yes.
Motion passed. Okay, public hearing regarding public right-of-way vacation in the portion of Orchard Drive. Mike?
Please, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to explain this item. I'd like to direct the council's attention to the big board for a brief presentation on this item. As Mayor DeWard stated, the purpose of tonight's public hearing is to discuss the proposed vacation of Orchard Drive. Now, this would be the section of Orchard Drive that would be south of Monroe Street. So just to orientate the members in the audience and those following at home, the area that we're actually talking about is this red highlighted area that's just south of Monroe Street. You can see Orchard Drive to the north, Monroe Street over here. And then off to the southeast is Pella Regional Hospital. In fact, Pella Regional owns all the property surrounding this segment of Monroe Street. Now, this vacation is being proposed has been requested by Pella Regional, as well as approximately 92 feet in length. There are no utilities that are located within this area as well. As far as the transportation plan, we do not believe that this vacation of this ordinance or the removal of the designation of public right-of-way on this segment of the property would negatively affect or impact the city's transportation plans. So with that, Mr. Mayor, we are recommending approval of the ordinance this evening of vacating the public right-of-way, and that concludes the staff presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Any written comments, Mandy?
No written comments.
Council?
Mike, I just had a question on the sidewalk. Is that a city sidewalk through there or a private one that goes through the middle of that?
And Denny, would you like to address that?
I believe it was put in by the hospital and it's always been maintained by the hospital. Is my understanding.
So there's no right-of-way issues that would go with that anywhere?
No, I don't, you guys haven't either to that, have you? No. So the hospital must have done years ago.
Okay. So do I trespass when I walk on it?
You might now.
Okay.
Unless you're headed to the hospital.
Okay.
Is there easement south of there at all? It's not drawn in there, but so that's a dead end easement anyway.
That is correct.
Okay, anything else? Any comments from any member of the audience concerning this item? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing. Young, Hopkins, any discussion? All in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
DeAnstruck.
Yes.
Carlstrom.
Motion passed. Ordinance number 1011, entitled an ordinance vacating the public right-of-way in the portion of Orchard Drive located south of Monroe Street between lots 15 and 16 of the Monroe addition in the City of Pella, and this is the first reading. Mike, I assume nothing to add?
You are correct, sir.
Can I get a motion for approval?
So moved.
Bandstra? Hopkins? Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeAnstruck.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Carlstrom.
Yes.
Motion passed.
I'm going to make a motion that we waive the second and third readings of this.
Okay, is there support for that?
Support.
Second. So, Bandstra, Vanderhorst, any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeAnstruck.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Carlstrom.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Okay, now I need a motion for adoption of ordinance number 1011.
Move to adopt.
Vanderhorst,
Support.
Hopkins, any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
DeAnstruck.
Yes.
Carlstrom.
Yes.
Motion passed. Special event permit request for nature walks and bat survey at Big Rock Park. Mike?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to explain this item. For those following at home, I'm on slide number 6 this evening. This particular special event permit request comes to us from the Friends of Big Rock Park. And as the mayor stated, this pertains to an official bat survey, which would start if council approved this event on Friday, June 10th, and would conclude on Saturday, June 11th. In addition to the bat survey, there would also be nature walks that would be planned on Saturday, June 11th as well. It is important to note that all departments have reviewed the application. The fee and insurance certificate have been received by staff, and staff is recommending approval this evening. So, Mr. Mayor, that concludes our presentation. Be more than happy to answer any questions the council may have on this item.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Can I get a motion for approval?
So moved.
Support.
Vanderhorst, DeYoung. Is this part of the environmental study?
It is.
Okay.
It's the scientists that are conducting it. Should be very interesting.
Okay, anything else? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
DeAnstruck.
Yes.
Carlstrom.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Motion passed. Okay, resolution number 6425, entitled Resolution Approving Preliminary Plat for Dingaman's Subdivision Plat 1. We tabled this at the April 5, 2022 council meeting, so I need a motion to remove the item from the table.
So moved.
Support.
DeYoung, Spore, any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
DeAnstruck.
Yes.
Carlstrom.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Motion passed. So now, Mike, you can explain pay careful attention, now motion for approval. There's some different approval options here, so whoever makes a motion at the end, we gotta be specific about what we're approving, okay?
Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to explain this item. I'd like to refer everyone's attention to the big board, and for those following at home, I'm on slide number 7 this evening. As Mayor DeWard stated, Mr. Jeff Dingman had submitted a revised preliminary plat to subdivide 2 parcels. The 2 parcels are roughly 16 acres in size, and specifically what's being proposed is 2 developable lots, 2 outlots, and 1 lot for dedication / reservation of public right-of-way. As Mayor DeWard stated, we did table this at April 5th meeting. The plat we are considering this evening is different than what we tabled on April 5th as well. It is important to note when we talk about plats, just so everyone's on understanding, council understands this, but members of the audience maybe not so. When we talk about preliminary plats, that's the overall game plan for the development. So oftentimes when you talk about preliminary plats, you'll talk about the long-term public infrastructure that is required for developments, oftentimes when you have a preliminary plat, that's the master plan for the development. When you talk about a final plats are done in phases on it, so this is everything that is being for the entire property. Final plats are oftentimes portions of the property, and oftentimes final plats are considered after a portion of the public infrastructure has been built and dedicated to the city of Pella as well. So final plats are in phases. They're used for land transferable reporting purposes at the county level. Preliminary plats, what we're talking about this evening, is the master plan for the development. Now, it is important to know, just to orientate everyone, where West 12th Street is located at. I believe we have the Baymont Hotel off to the east over here, representative trees right here. And we do have a picture of the road, as it currently said, with the temporary cul-de-sac that is located on West 12th Street as well. Now, let's go ahead, please, Mandy. Now, as far as the plat itself is concerned, the applicant is proposing a cul-de-sac in lieu of extending West 12th Street to the northern property line. So when we talk about the northern property line, for the applicant, he's identified the northern half of the property as an outlot, so that's undevelopable at this time, and literally set aside on the preliminary plat. The lots 1 and 2 would be buildable lots, and under city code requires that West 12th Street be extended up to the northern property line. So this would be the northern boundary of the property, and that's what the city code requires. There's approximately either 7 or 8 code sections that deal directly with the extension of West 12th Street and what's required under city code with that as well. And for these reasons, the plat as submitted, the city staff does not believe it meets city code and the subdivision code requirements. Mandy, let's go ahead, please. Now, as far as the preliminary plat is concerned, what we always do is we always compare the preliminary plat for conformity with the city's comprehensive plan. That's required under the city code as well. Now, the future use land map for this site, you can see is the yellow highlighted area up on the big board. It actually identifies the majority of this property for low-density residential for this as well. And it's because of these reasons, when this property was rezoned in 2020, that the council actually put some conditions on this rezoning. In fact, with the rezoning, we removed allowable uses that would be normally allowed with M1 or traditional M1 zoning uses. The reason for that is the thought was that there's likely going to be residential development someday abutting the property, and some of the M1 uses that we removed we viewed as could be detrimental to residential development in the future. And we also require design standards and additional screening. And this was one of the reasons when we talked about the West 12th Street extension, why we felt it was important, or the city code felt it was important when you talk about additional development up to the north of this property and the extension of streets. We feel it's very important. That underscores why it is important when we talk about long-term, the extension of West 12th Street to accommodate additional development into the future. So let's go ahead, please, Mandy. Now, what we have pictured up here was what was submitted with the rezoning application. It was a concept plan. It had the extension of West 12th Street at the time of the rezoning with this as well. We would also like to mention, when you talk about the comprehensive plan actually talks about cul-de-sacs. In fact, the comprehensive plan recommends the avoidance of single access cul-de-sacs. It specifically states new streets should line up with existing streets to connect new development to existing neighborhoods using multiple entrances. Single cul-de-sacs should be avoided unless environmental factors preclude otherwise on it as well. So when you talk about single access cul-de-sacs, they're generally recommended against the comprehensive plan as well. In addition, for this area, we did a forecast, or the comprehensive plan, the future use land map does show additional residential development in the future, and we think that's one of the reasons when we talk about West 12th Street extension that it is needed in the future. So let's go ahead, please, Mandy. Now, as far as the Planning and Zoning Commission, they've spent a lot of time on this issue, and I would say they've really dug into this and researched and asked a lot of good questions about it. So rest assured that the Planning and Zoning Commission has spent an incredible amount of time on this matter. They reviewed this actually in 2 meetings on here. And on May 11th, they held a special meeting of the commission. They conditionally approved the preliminary plat on a 4-2 vote. And the condition that the Planning and Zoning Commission had at that meeting was that outlots A and B, so this would be the public right-of-way, and lots 1 and 2 could not be sold until all the required improvements are constructed for the West 12th Street extension. to the northern border of lots 1 and 2. And what was cited during the meeting, the city attorney was in attendance at this meeting, was Iowa Code Section 354.8. What that code section really deals with is some cities, we have not done it here at the City of Pella, but some cities have relied on Iowa Code Section to negotiate acceptable development agreements for developers for alternative requirements for plating requirements under city code. We have not done that procedure in the City of Pella, so when we talk about making conditions on the plat, that's the section of Iowa Code where it derives its legislative authority to do so, is 354.8. So let's go ahead, please, Mandy. Now, overall, staff in reviewing the Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation, to summarize what our belief was, we believe the intention of the Commission's recommendation was to limit development on the property until all required public improvements were installed. And reviewing the recommendation, and if council is going to consider an alternative proposal for city code requirements and really defer all public improvements, and looking at this item, we have 2 additional conditions if council would like to consider this item or consider this method. Number 1, we would recommend that there also be a limitation on the number of building permits which could be issued for the preliminary plat, and we would recommend that number be identified as 1 building permit on it until all public infrastructure is installed. And the reason for this, we believe the Planning and Zoning Commission with the land sales, we understand the reasoning for doing this. The land sales and transfer of property would be very difficult for us to track. We control building permits on the property. And our thoughts are too, is if you're looking at negotiating a development agreement under a policy that frankly has not been done before at the City of Pella, and it could serve as a precedent for other developers as well. Our thoughts would be is it should be a limited amount of development until all the required public infrastructure is in place as well. And that's part of the reason why we are recommending that we identify the building permits and limit the number of building permits that could be issued for this as well. That is something that we can control, we can track, and we believe that that does meet the intention of the Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation. Item number 2 would be, and this would be what I would term, we want to protect the future right-of-way where West 12th Street would be extended in the future. So what we would have for Lot A, and I'm talking about the area that would be identified as the West 12th Street extension in the future, we think it's very wise if we're going to look at policies or potential conditions on preliminary plats that we protect the right-of-way in the future. So what we would recommend is that no building permits be issued for Lot A, and that this parcel could not be combined with another parcel for development. In addition, we would also just address, so there's no confusion or misunderstanding with the applicant or potential other buyers of the property in the future, that this parcel would be transferred to the City of Pella once West 12th Street is constructed and accepted as public improvement by the City Council. The reason why this is necessary, even with the 1 building permit on this, if you look at city code and keep in mind that this would be additional conditions that are not necessarily in line with our existing city code, but when you look at the site planning process, that building could be put anywhere over here. And we want to avoid having a building right here, placed here, that could preclude the extension of West 12th Street in the future. So that's the reason why we want to make sure that West 12th Street is protected in the future. So those would be our 2 recommendations if council would like to consider additional conditions and allow some development to occur on the property. A, the limitation of building permits issued, and our recommendation would be 1, and then 2, we want to make it crystal clear that no development could occur on Lot A, and that parcel would be transferred to the City of Pella once West 12th Street is constructed and accepted as a public improvement by the Pella City Council. So let's go ahead, please, Mandy. Okay. Now, overall, our views on this item is we believe allowing applicants to defer required improvements is a policy issue and needs to be carefully considered by the City Council. Ideally, we have a policy in place before we consider an application on it, but that's not necessarily the case sometimes. Sometimes you have to take action on items. Now, the reason why we're saying that this needs to be considered carefully is it could be difficult, absent an approved policy, for staff to know what conditions would be necessary for an applicant, what conditions would be necessary for an applicant to have the ability to defer required improvements in the future. And because anytime you get into a gray area and you I don't want to sound negative on the matter on it. It's just something that we've traditionally not done. But you always have the possibility of unintended consequences in the future. Other developers coming into the city that are proposing in their eyes what could be something very similar that may not necessarily be similar, but they view it as similar, and it could lead to unintended consequences. It's for these reasons why we have our two additional recommendations along with the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation for council to consider this evening. So with that, we would recommend in the future that if council would like to defer public improvements, allow a limited amount of development to occur on the property, we believe, that's a policy decision. But if that's something that we want to do in the future and in this application in the future, we really should develop a policy or change the subdivision code so it aligns with that. And so we have direction at the staff level for future developments and future requests that we may receive from applicants on the matter. So let's go ahead, please, Mandy. And I believe this is what Mayor DeWard was talking about here. So we have three options up here. Staff is not making a recommendation on this matter. The reason why we are not making a recommendation on this matter is council has not adopted a policy for the deferral of public improvements. And from our standpoint, since we don't have a policy, that's the reason why we're not making a recommendation. But as far as our options are considered this evening, number one would be to conditionally approve the preliminary plat subject to the conditions established by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So that would basically be when we look at those two lots, lots 1 and 2, and lot A, and including the outlots on the development, that the properties could not be sold until all the public improvements are in place. Option number 2 would take that planning and zoning recommendation and add in the 2 additional conditions recommended by staff. We'd limit the number of building permits issued to the preliminary plat to 1 until all required public infrastructure is installed per city code. And no building permits would be issued for Lot A, which is the public right-of-way, the future West 12th Street extension. And this parcel could not be combined with another parcel for development. And also we would specify that the parcel would be transferred to the city once West 12th Street is constructed and accepted by the Pella City Council. Option number 3 would be to deny the preliminary plat. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, that concludes the staff presentation this evening. Be more than happy to answer any questions the mayor or council may have on this item.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Is anyone prepared to make a motion on one of these three options?
I'll take a stab at it. I assume, well, I'm going to make a motion that we adopt option 2. And I assume we will work on policies that going forward make that real, because if you do it once, it will come up again.
Okay, so we have a motion to adopt the second option for this particular preliminary plan. Is there support for that?
Support.
So DeYoung, Banstra. And do you have what you need for motion? Okay, discussion, questions?
Mike, could you go to slide 11, please?
Okay, Mandy, could you please go to slide 11?
Or maybe slide 12.
Okay, slide 12.
When one of the recommendations was that you wanted to get away was that the property couldn't be sold. You didn't want to use the sales as a tracking measure on that rather than building permits. So thinking of worst case scenario like bankers always do, if we're basing on building permits, the structure gets built, he gets run over by a cement truck, and his estate wants to sell it. Under the second one, that could be sold then. That
Not necessarily. Our recommendation, let me, I'll clarify.
there was one slide, I must have had the wrong one.
Yeah,
So.
Yeah, I think you had it right up there.
Okay.
And I wouldn't say it's a concern of the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation. I would say it was our impression that they made recommendations that they thought would limit the development of the property at the meeting. And so that's why they gravitated towards sales. From our standpoint, if we're talking about limiting development on the property until all public improvements are in place, we think it would be very difficult for us to track sales on the property as far as any type of limitations on it. And so we are making 2 additional recommendations. So our recommendation, or the option 2, still has the limitation on sales on this, but it also includes two additional recommendations, that A, the limitation of building permits, and then B, the no development on Lot A, which is the public right-of-way. So under that scenario, when we talk about sales, that's one of the items that was in the planning and zoning recommendation, is still within the lot, item number 2.
Yeah, and I maybe misunderstood. I was at that P and Z meeting. I thought it was talking about sales of additional property, not the property that the initial building was going to be built on. But that was my understanding.
Well, the additional building, as far as the additional building, that was the recommendation that came back as far as the sales on it. That's the planning and zoning recommendation. I wasn't at the meeting.
It was for additional, it was for, it comes across as lot 1 and 2 for sale. The applicant stated he did not intend to sell lot 1 because he wanted to build his shop there.
Right.
So that was what we were looking at, but, that's kind of his vision then, is his shop on lot 1, subsequently, possible sale of lot 2.
And it comes down to the point of, I guess, the sticking point is a cul-de-sac versus a street to the end. That's the one versus the other.
Well, just on the recommendations, what we're considering, as far as overall, what the city code requires is that the property owner would be, or the applicant would be required to build when extend West 12th Street through the northern property. And so, Mandy, I think if we can go back one, I know we're messing up, and Councilmember Bannister will come back to this item. So with the preliminary plat, West 12th Street for the final code would have to be shown as extended up to the northern property line of lots 1 and 2 for the preliminary plat.
And outlot B just is, it's not considered as part of the development.
Yeah, and traditionally what we've done with outlots is we've marked non-developable until you comply with city subdivision requirements. So the thought would be, is when the applicant looks to develop outlot D, you'd have a street right here, and then you'd be talking about a new street that would be extended through outlot B at that time.
Did Mr. Dignan sell outlot B after this plot were approved?
With the recommendation that we have, I believe that outlot B would not be allowed to be sold either.
If he extended West 12th to the end of lot 1, 2, A, I guess it is, could he then sell it?
Yes.
It's an
Yes.
existing plot at that point.
Yes, that is correct.
Which is one of the hopes behind the policy about extending infrastructure,
Yeah.
so the next thing can move.
Yeah.
I think the cul-de-sac lessens the value significantly of ground distal to west, what would be West 12th. I think that needs to be considered. I don't know who that owner is, but I mean, I think there's method to these policies for instances like this. I think the exceptions make spaghetti bowl out of a already spaghetti bowl code. Those are my initial thoughts.
Is Mr. Dingaman here this evening?
I think he's here.
Okay.
I don't know if he's on.
What I heard and what I read, when I was at the planning and zoning meeting, and when I reviewed his impeccable records, Mr. Dingaman was told by the city to put the cul-de-sac in. And he paid to put the cul-de-sac in. And Mr. Dingaman has followed everything, every guideline that this city has put before him. And he has paid engineering fees in order to do this. And I believe I heard at that meeting that he has already spent $58,000, and perhaps that's a low estimate. What I also heard is that he is fine with giving right-of-way, street right-of-ways. He has no problem with that. The man just wants to build a shop on the lot. And he's talking about growing hay in this furthest lot. But there'd come a time when the city needed to have West 12th be a through street, he's fine with that. So, in listening to planning and zoning and listening to their discussions, I really think that they've done an admirable job of coming up with a compromise for this man's land that I can't support option 2. Because when I read the emails and I read the conversations and I think back to all concessions that we've made to other landowners in my time on city council, I'm having a really difficult time wrapping my head around this issue for Mr. Dingaman. So I think that what isn't being said is he isn't talking about subdividing this. He's talking about growing hay and building a shop. And so I just have a hard time with this issue.
What in 2 do you find objectionable?
I just think that, first of all, I think that we don't need to dismiss, I don't want to dismiss what planning and zoning came up with because they spent a lot of time on it. And, you know, we have a government that's based on a committee system, which we do. I think we need to really take their suggestion very strongly. If we need to look at regrouping, as I think I heard you saying, Mike, and looking at writing new policy before we make a decision, then I think that's what we have to do.
But doesn't 2 include what P and Z?
Partially, yes.
It's cyclically planning and zoning
Okay.
recommendation.
Oh, well, then maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Yeah. Andy, let's go back to the recommendation, just so, not the recommendation, but the options.
No, I'm just,
Yeah.
I mean, we have a member of planning and zoning here, and I don't want to put you on the spot. Does 2 indeed include the plan that you have suggested to us?
I hate to speak for the whole board, but I will tell you what I understand. We didn't specifically say limit his number of building permits to 1. He wants to put 1 building on.
His shop.
His shop. And what he told us was his shop would be on the lot 1. And he did not have any plans. He was willing to wait to sell anything off ever until the infrastructure was in. And the cost, to address what Spencer said, the cost of building to the end, I think, was well over $1 million.
It was.
It was $500,000 just to go to that first piece. So that was a factor. That's a lot of money for a single small business owner to come up with in one jump.
Right.
And that was a big factor to us. Mr. Dingaman, we felt, followed everything the city has told him to do for 2 years. 2 years he's done this. Gone to the city, gotten a recommendation, followed the recommendation, come back with that, city came up with another recommendation. He had, I believe it's 200 pages, very well documented of every one of those meetings and conversations. So this is a big deal to Mr. Dingaman. I don't know why he's not here tonight. I would assume it's something very important because he's been at all of our meetings and was very detailed in his explanation to us, and we were feeling that we wanted to help our small business. We help our big business. We want to help our small business as well.
So, Lynn, in answer to your question,
Right.
the way I read, Mark made a motion to adopt number 2. It says conditionally approve the preliminary plot subject to the conditions established by the commission.
Mm-hmm.
So the conditions established by the commission are in there, plus these 2 additional. So there's some add-on to what the commission
Right.
says. You asked whether the recommendations from the commission were in there.
Right,
This
right.
says they are.
Okay.
Forgive me for giving an overly simple
that's
question.
fine. I'm probably missing.
So Lynn, you said that in your time on city council, you've made exceptions.
Right, we have.
Because since I've been mayor, I get asked all the time, people
Uh-huh.
have this around and they want to subdivide it, and under city code, they can't just subdivide it. So this is a real hot topic
It is.
for a lot of people in the mile radius, in the city limits. Hear about it a lot.
Mhm.
So what I think we need to be very careful that we don't open a can of worms here. If there's all these people that have similar situations to this, because the way I understand it, you can subdivide once, but if you do it more than once, you have to do a subdivision, and you gotta put infrastructure in, and there's a lot of requirements. If we feel like some of our code is detrimental to development, then we should look at code and change code. We shouldn't be out there making exceptions against code for specific reasons. So I want to know, you said since you've been on the council, can you give me an example where an exception to code, other than PUDs, which are planned
No,
urban
and
developments?
that's a fair question.
Can I hear what kind of exception there was given? Because I haven't seen it since I've been here.
Well, I think that there are times that we have looked at policy. I think that there was I think a perfect and recent exception is when at Prairie Ridge, we are allowing the decks to be built at a different depth than is mandated by code. So that's my most recent exception that I can come up with. I just want to be sure in this is, and I agree with you, this has to be handled very carefully, extremely carefully, because we are setting a precedent. So I want to be sure that we're looking at this with the right set of lenses, not only for the community, but out of fairness to Mr. Dingman as well. That's my only caution. And so I want to fully understand what we're voting on. And if we need to consider policy prior to voting on this, that's one of my main steps on this. Because, just out of fairness to everybody, fairness to people presently and fairness to people in the future. So, you did an excellent job of explaining to me. Perhaps I did some misinterpretation of that. So I'm thankful to be able to take the time to discuss it. I just didn't know if I heard Mike saying, do we need to look at policy prior to a vote? And perhaps I did not hear that correctly.
I don't think Mike suggested that we do that, something to consider.
Mhm.
Adopt the policy. Seems to me that this is pretty, with these conditions, it's pretty limiting exposure from other types of development, small development.
So, if my question is similar, I can think of, I've talked to 3 people who I can think of are gonna be calling me up. They see this and like, hey, so can I split my property now that I've been trying to do for a while? That's my one concern, is that what you said, Mayor, that we just need to be careful. If we move ahead with one of these options, fine. But to consider, is that something we need to actually, maybe to Lynn's point, is that something we need to consider policy first? Or is this this is kind of constricting enough to protect from that? And then my other question is, if this lot was just standalone and all that Mr. Dingman wanted to do right now was build a property, build a shop on it, could he do that as it stands right now?
Mandy, if we could go back to the preliminary plat, please. Very important to note, if you recall, we showed the picture, there was just a temporary cul-de-sac on the site. There's regulations under the city subdivision code that states you have to have so much abutting public street frontage on the site. The city attorney has ruled, when you just look at the only frontage on the site is basically a street, a temporary street that butts up. This does not count as public street frontage. So literally this lot is a unusable lot without an extension of a street through it. So the answer is no.
Even if it was just one lot?
Just one lot. That's my
Even with that,
understanding.
if you were to do the cul-de-sac.
That's why you have to do either the cul-de-sac, well, I want to be careful. What the city code requires is West 12th Street to be extended. That's why the street extension is required.
Does it require the street to be extended if it's not subdivided? That's my question.
Yeah, but the city attorney has ruled this lot does not have public street frontage on it, because the only public street frontage, if you were to look at it, is the dead-end street, not dead-end, but West 12th Street right here, because that's owned by the City of Pella, it's an existing right-of-way, that does not count as public street frontage. So without that, the lot does not have any public street frontage, and that's the reason why the West 12th Street extension is necessary, and you couldn't just proceed with the site plan.
If I owned that land, I couldn't just say, to heck with this planning process, I'm gonna run a driveway off the end of the street into my building and be done with it.
That's the reasoning why the code is the way it is. For that reason, West 12th Street was started, it's extended, and that's the reason for the city's rules. Once a street starts on it, you have to have, I'd say, legitimate reasons for not extending the street. And usually they're due to topography for not extending the street. That's the waiver exception under the city subdivision.
This is also, this motion, Mark, is for deferment of infrastructure, is that part of it?
Well, we call it deferment of infrastructure because what normally happens, what the code says, is if you subdivide property and you have public infrastructure, you have to extend public infrastructure to the northern boundary of your property line. And so in this case, when we look at the public infrastructure, we believe West 12th Street is required to be extended to the northern property line of the property line. So by doing this, what we're allowing is development to occur. One building under this motion number 2 could be built, cul-de-sac would be in place, and then to develop the rest of the property, which would be lot 2 or additional development on lot 1 outside of the one building, West 12th Street would have to be extended.
Is there a time frame on that, or could that be 100 years from now?
It's a note on the preliminary plat, so when Mr. Dingman comes in and does the final plats on there, that's how we would judge, and the criteria for the final plat would be, unless it would be amended again in the future by the Pella City Council.
One of the reasons why I'm not too worried about this being a precedent is that the P&Z, I was trying to make a concession after close to 2 years of conflicting information. And so that it's okay, how do we kind of settle this and make everybody kind of happy and go with this? I thought they did a fairly good job of trying to do that. I think we even strengthened that with those 2 conditions, frankly, that the staff has recommended. I don't really think that hurts. I'm going to ask you to go back to 11 once more, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I'm sorry for not referring back to that.
No, that's fine. I'm going to ask Robin again, don't speak for the commission, speak for yourself. I did not ever hear that lot 1 was not allowed to be sold.
No.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't. I didn't hear that either.
So I guess I just have, again, you look at a trap, if something happens to him and his estate wants to sell it, we've already issued the 1 building permit, nothing else changes. I don't care if Jeff owns it or Calvin owns it, the conditions still stay the same.
Yeah.
I think that's a rough condition to put on it personally, especially since I think I'm going to say that was a misinterpretation at the P&Z meeting myself, but again, as Jerry has said, that we have no recordings of that, do we?
We do, but they're not finished yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Councilmember Banstrad, that's a legitimate concern. Please keep in mind whether this is the Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation or city administration, it's just a recommendation. Council's the final say-so. So if there needs to be, if you'd like to amend and have additional requirements on there or make modifications to either one of these and allow lot one, if that's what you'd like to do, then now's the time to be considering that.
I think your two other things you added, I don't think that hurts the intent of the commission myself at all. I think it strengthens the desire to say if anything else happens, we need that improvements there according to the code. So yeah, that would, I'd like to hear other council members' thoughts on that, but I just think it's pretty restrictive not to sell lot one. If this doesn't happen for 100 years, that building can't be sold, because I don't think Jeff's gonna live 100 years.
I think that's a good point, Cal, to protect Jeff a little bit. I think the conditions protect the easement, right? That's the objective, to be in line with our comprehensive plan. I think he cannot sell to or B with that. That's protected as well, correct? And he can do his ultimate goal, and that is run his business off of this plot he's purchased already.
No building permits on A.
And as you
And
say,
you can have
if he did, so his building's gonna be on lot one. So if he sold lot one, no other building could go on there
Right.
until the street went through.
Right.
But there is no condition or contingency that mandates a time frame for West 12th going through. And so that's a part of the worm can that opens if we allow more and more exceptions to deferred infrastructure, which I think that's the crazy, dangerous part of that. And I would absolutely agree that we need to revise and or look at our code again after this to hopefully help eliminate or reclose that can, if we will. I'm hesitant to make an exception here, but I understand the labor he's gone through. That engineering fee sounds incredibly high.
Hey, Jeff just showed up.
So, I'm sorry to put $60,000 into it already, but, yeah, making exceptions makes for, like Dave alluded to, a lot of people coming to Jerry's office here shortly and saying, yep, I want one of those too.
And I would ask of Denny, does this sort of proposal create headaches for utilities?
Absolutely. I'm gonna go on a limb. I recommend 3. This just destroys the city codes. Be ready to rewrite the city code. And I want to correct a little bit of the record. The written record, maybe nothing's there, but I know maybe before the applicant purchased the property, I warned him the street going through is gonna haunt him. Because other people have looked at it, they've been held to that standard, other potential buyers walked. Of course, we didn't like that answer. Here we are today, still making that argument. So, I think Spencer was maybe saying it earlier, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Once a construction shop's built on lot one, you lose value for anybody to build that street halfway through. And the other thing, I don't know where the $500,000 and more come for that much street. That's about 650, 700 feet. High side, normal times, maybe it's high right at the moment, but that's 250. That's not 500. So 500 should get you closer to the end.
Well, if I own the farm, I don't have the map in my head. If I own the farm immediately to the north of this, I'd be here, red under the collar, not wanting exceptions, because that dramatically decreases the value of the future of my kids, or whatever. I hate this for Jeff, because I think this is a really tight spot, but I think that's what I'm so hesitant about the exception part for. And it makes it really hard with a little bit of a developer's mind to finance or get that road built to do anything else off of 2 and B, the way it sits too.
And I agree with the comments that you made. There's going to be many people bombard staff in the next few weeks if this goes through without the new street, including a church that we told them they couldn't do this, and now they're east of town and pay more money. I think they're happy it turned out well, but
But I don't think the church was offered the chance to do a cul-de-sac either.
Actually,
that's correct. They were told that street had to go through.
Right,
That's
and
absolutely
see,
correct.
and
That's
that
my point.
didn't happen here. Jeff was given the opportunity to do a cul-de-sac.
That didn't come from my shop.
Is some of this the result of having some transition in this role? We have to talk about that elephant. We've had, this was pre-Jerry, correct? Again, I kind of coming in on the tail end of this too, but we've had different people in that position, and so that's an unfortunate portion of this.
Yeah, let me, I'll try to just address in general. Keep in mind, when the city takes action, we take action on applications on it. It isn't one person said, you submit an application, whether it's a preliminary plat, final plat, site plan, you submit an application, it's reviewed by the professional staff, it's reviewed by the city attorney, it's reviewed by the city engineer. There's lots of comments. Now, we're not getting into the allegations on what was said and what wasn't said, and who said, who didn't say. The application, what's really before us is the first step at the development process. That's the program plat. That's all that's been done. That's the application. That's when the city takes official action. It's important to keep that in mind as we proceed and evaluate developments on this, because if you didn't have that process on there, it'd be very difficult to enforce city subdivision ordinances.
Yeah, I agree with that, but also people take direction from city staff too.
And there was, I submitted it several times and waited for comment back. They said they needed 10 days. I did that 3 or 4 times with this plan alone. And there was plenty of times to say, no, we don't want to do that, from September to November 29. And it was not done until January 8th. And it was, we submitted different versions of this with trees and 3 times. And every time it was, looks good, put this here, fire chief says this. Not once was there ever a, you're not going to be able to do this, so stop spending your money. That never happened.
And I don't think there was any malintent anywhere. I think it just was a circumstance of different information given and acted upon, and I don't think anybody was trying to be mean or unreasonable in anything. And I think the P&Z took that into consideration with their decision, the recommendation.
All right. Is Gerald here? Gerald? Yeah. Okay. Gerald, wasn't it Robin who had 18 different sites where it had concessions had been made very, very similar to this? And that
Robin is present in the audience.
So, there she is. But I was there for that. There was a lot of those that were brought up, and concessions have been made, and very recently, in fact, multiple times. Am I wrong? So if this is the first time this has happened, there's a lot of other options around town. It's happened recently, and it's been voted on. By,
Tell me one.
One would be the, help me out here, Pella Court. The road where the new water pump
It's
station is
not a
at.
road, that's a private driveway.
It wasn't when they started.
Yes, it was. It's never been converted.
But it was voted on in P&Z, it came to city council so it could be done that
So
way.
the Van Poles could.
Who paid for
develop
that street?
The city needed Jordan.
Who paid for the street?
City of Pella.
Yes, and it was voted on here. I'm not asking for your money.
It's still private drive, it always was, Jeff. It's not, it's apples and oranges.
Okay, well,
Like a road being paved this week, and the guys out Dave's and Shady Brook, they're extending it, I don't know, 300-400 feet. You got 2 gentlemen wanting to build 2 houses. Well, they're paying it to the end sometime this week. I think subgrade passed today. They weren't allowed this option.
That was this.
It even makes more sense there than
Yeah.
a major creek that someday is gonna have a $200,000 culvert for the other side to develop. But we held them to stubborn to the,
Because I actually looked at buying that property and putting a driveway off the end of it for myself.
Yep.
And I couldn't, because I couldn't, I had to go through this process and carry that, and I was like, well, I can't bite that off, so that's why I didn't end up.
and when I did buy it, I was not told that there had to be a road there. I was told to go by the comp plan. The comp plan showed a connector street, and I had to do it. If
No.
it did, that's what you told me, your words out of
the
your mouth.
working maps, the comp plan says we shall deny cul-de-sacs almost everywhere.
You
They're
told
not
me
a
to
good
look at the
thing for a
map.
city or development or transportation. That's what's wrong with our northwest corner of
That's
Pella.
why
We've got 3,000-4,000 people up there, with only a couple of outlets.
Well, there's 3 outlets within 1,500 feet right here, already without this. 300 feet up that way, 500 feet this way, and 1,000 feet this way at Walmart. There's already, so there's plenty of north-south connector streets. I'm just,
The city actually did an access management plan, I believe it was 07, 08, adopted by council, showing a frontage street through this area with 11, 12, a whole bunch of them connected, where stoplights should be someday, where driveways can be allowed, maybe some that we should eliminate, all of that. And that was all a similar time period. The comp plan, Mike Brown and some of those are consultant, they drew streets all over outside the outskirts. I mean, the sports park, we had lots and streets going every which way, but when the map was printed in the book, all of that was pulled off. And they left the narrative in there.
Okay.
We shall not recommend.
All right, so we have a motion on the table. Are you guys ready to vote on that motion? Well, we have to vote on it because it's on the table. Or you have to vote. You have to vote on it. Is there anything else before we vote on that? And the motion was to adopt, can you pull it back up, Mandy? Motion was to adopt number 2. Conditionally approved preliminary plat subject to the conditions established by the commission plus the 2 additional conditions recommended by staff, which is limiting the number of building permits issued for preliminary plat to 1 until all required public infrastructure is installed per city code, and no building permits will be issued for Lot A, and this parcel cannot be combined with another parcel for development. This parcel will be transferred to the city of once West 12th Street is constructed, accepted by council. So that's the motion.
I need a Robert's Rule of Order. Is Mark the only one that can amend the motion?
Yeah, I agree with Cal, see if you would amend it.
Yeah.
To be able to sell Lot 1.
Oh. Yeah, I'm good with that.
I'll second it.
Okay,
Make
so.
a motion to amend my motion to address Lot 1.
To add a 3rd bullet point that Lot 1 can be resold. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So DeYoung and Banster. Okay. So we need to vote on the amendment first. Okay? Does anybody want to say anything else? Okay, so we will vote on the amendment. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Bandstra.
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Spore.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Okay, motion passed.
Make the motion.
Now, well, your motion's still on the table.
Yeah, but it needs to be made as amended.
As amended, yes, okay. So the motion is to adopt conditions 2 as amended by DeYoung. So is there support?
Support.
Banster. Okay, call the roll on that one.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Bandstra.
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Hopkins.
No.
Spore.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Motion passed. Okay, moving on. Resolution number 6436 entitled Resolution Approving Change Order Number 3 and Accepting the Public Improvements for the Qantas Park Improvements Project.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, once again, I'd like to direct everyone's attention to the Bay Board for a brief presentation on this item. For those following at home, I'm on slide number 16 this evening. What this resolution would do would approve change order number 3 and also accepts all the public improvements for the Qantas Park Improvements Project. We do have a picture of the park up on the big board as well. Now, as background on this, in 2019, Council did approve a development agreement with Wonder, and Councilmember Banster may relate.
Wunderspielen.
Okay, as stated on this. And so commonly referred to as the local Kiwanis Club from our standpoint, a lot of the same members, but it was for an all-inclusive playground, restroom facility, shelter house, a Sonia arch, as well as parking, sidewalks, and fencing. Now, part of the agreement, it is important to note that the city's financial contribution for the project was just over $361,000 for the project. So let's go ahead, please, Mandy. Now, as far as change order number 3 that we are considering this evening, the construction contract is just over, would increase the construction contract over by $3,958.49 for upgraded restrooms and storm sewer culvert outlet guards for safety purposes as well. If council were to approve this change order that we are considering this evening, we would be left with a revised construction contract of $1,509,630.66. The city's engineer, Snyder and Associates, is recommending approval or project acceptance, as they believe the project was completed in accordance with approved plans and specifications. Staff is also in agreement with this, Mr. Mayor, so we are recommending approval this evening, and be more than happy to answer any questions the mayor and council may have on this item.
All right, thanks, Mike. Can I get a motion for approval?
So moved.
Support.
DeYoung, Brander, Horst, discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
DeAnstruck.
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Motion passed. Resolution number 6437, entitled Resolution Fixing Date for a Public Hearing on the Proposal to Convey Real Property to Pella Regional Health Center and providing for publication of notice thereof. Mike?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to explain this item. And the big takeaway on this is all we're really doing on this item is establishing June 21st as the public hearing date for this proposed sale to Pella Regional, and it's for the vacated right-of-way that's just south of Monroe Street. It's the red highlighted area up on the big board. The right-of-way total is just under 4,600 square feet on it. The purchase price is based off existing city policy of 50 cents per square foot for vacated right-of-way, plus in accordance with what's been done in the past, Pella Regional Hospital will also be reimbursing the city for our legal expenses as well. So with this, Mr. Mayor, we are recommending approval of the resolution, which just simply establishes June 21st as the public hearing date.
All right, can I get a motion for approval?
So moved.
Support.
Vance for Spore, any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeAnstruck.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Motion passed. Resolution number 6438, entitled Resolution Approving Ordering the Preparation of Plans and Specifications, Form of Contract, Notice of Hearing, and Notice of Letting, setting date for public hearing, authorizing the taking of bids, and authorizing bid opening for the Old City Hall Alley Reconstruction Project. Mike?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to explain this item. As Mayor DeWard stated, what we're considering with this resolution is the proposed Old City Hall reconstruction project. To orientate everyone to this area, we're in the central business district. This would be the alley that's directly back of or south of Yarzma Bakery. Most people would know that. Reference alley that we are talking about, but Main Street is located off to the east, and then Broadway Street off to the west, and it's a bluish purple highlighted area that we are talking about for the alley project. Now, in essence, what we're proposing is complete infrastructure replacement with the alley. The alley would be replaced with a brick street as well in this particular alley. And we do have a description of the improvement on the big board. Mandy, let's please go ahead. The engineer for the project, and we do have a picture of the alley up on the big board as well. The engineer for the project is Garden and Associates. The opinion of probable cost they've given us for this segment of the alley is just over $450,000. Now, if council were to approve this resolution, we conducted bid letting on the project on June 14th, and hopefully we'd have an acceptable contract to present to council on the 21st of June as well. There are two important notice dates that we have, actually timeframes for the project. The first one would be the primary one would be have the alley project completed by November of 2022. An alternate bid would be to have this project actually done in 2023, and this is in the hopes of attracting more bidders for the project as well. We are recommending approval of this resolution, Mayor, and what we're simply doing by doing this is allowing staff to actually advertise for the project, accept that and solicit bids for the project. And the secondary item that we have is we're establishing June 21st as the public hearing date for the project. And with that, Mr. Mayor, that concludes our presentation this evening.
All right, thank you, Mike. Can I get a motion for approval?
So.
Support.
Brander, Horst, Hopkins, any discussion? All in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
DeAnstruck.
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Motion passed. Resolution Resolution number 6439, entitled Resolution Approving, Ordering the Preparation of Plans and Specifications, Form of Contract, Notice of Hearing and Notice of Letting, setting date for public hearing, authorizing the taking of bids, and authorizing bid opening for the Prairie Street Improvements Project. Mike?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd be happy to explain this item, and for those following at home, I'm on slide number 21 this evening. And it's a very similar project. What we're simply doing is we're requesting permission to solicit bids for the Prairie Street reconstruction project. And we're also requesting permission to establish June 21st as the public hearing date for the project. The area of Prairie Street that we are referencing with this project is the red highlighted area up on the big board. Is generally the area south of South Street and north of Truman Road. Is approximately 1,100 feet in length. It's currently a gravel road, and what's being proposed is converting this over to a urban cross-section, commonly known as a regular city street or a concrete street. And with that, Mr. Mayor, a couple of key points on this. The engineer on the project is Garding and Associates. Their opinion of probable cost is just over $736,000. Very similar schedule to what we had with the old City Hall project. We're looking at June 14th bid letting for the project, and hopefully we'll have an acceptable bid to present to council on the 21st of June. Final completion for the project is tentatively established at 80 working days, which should be somewhere towards the end of October. And with that, Mr. Mayor, that concludes our presentation. We are recommending approval this evening. We're more than happy to answer any questions the mayor or council may have on this item.
Thank you, Mike. Can I get a motion for approval?
Absolutely.
Support.
It took me 5 years.
Ranger Horse for, will you make note of an enthusiastic motion? Any discussion? All in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Amstruck.
No, I guess.
Oh my gosh. Right.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes. Motion passed.
You're lucky the ambulance guy is here.
Resolution number 6440, entitled Resolution Approving, Ordering the Preparation of Plans and Specifications, Form of Contract, Notice of Hearing, and Notice of Letting, setting date for public hearing, authorizing the taking of bids, and authorizing bid opening for the Prairie Ridge West Sanitary Sewer Project. Mike?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to explain this item. And as Mayor Ward stated, what we're discussing this evening is the Prairie Ridge West Sanitary Sewer Project. What this resolution will do, very similar to the other two projects or resolutions that we had this evening, simply establishes June 21st as the public hearing date for the project. And overall, when we're talking about the proposed sanitary sewer project extension, it's roughly 5,100 in linear feet. And just to orientate everyone, this purple highlighted area up here on the big board is the proposed project. G28 Washington Street is over here. The Prairie Ridge development is off over here. Now, it is important to note this particular sanitary sewer project that we are discussing this evening has been a part of the city's long-term sanitary sewer projects for a considerable period of time. So it is within our long-range plans to construct a sanitary sewer line extension as well. Let's go ahead, please, Mandy. Now, the engineer for the project is Veenstra and Kim, and their opinion of probable cost is just over $977,000. As council is aware, we do have an agreement with RDP Holdings for this project, and it states that RDP is responsible for the first $900,000 of the project. In the event of cost overruns on the part of the project, parties agree to work in good faith to address those cost overruns. And what we've agreed to date is to solicit bids and see what the actual bid cost on the projects are before we discuss any types of potential cost overruns on the project. Now, if council were to approve this resolution, we'd actually have a bid letting for the project on June 8th. Hopefully, we'd have a contractor, acceptable contract to present to council on June 21st. It is important to note that it is approximately 150 calendar days from the notice you proceed to construct the sanitary sewer project. So with that, Mr. Mayor, that concludes our presentation this evening. We'd be more than happy to answer any questions the mayor and council may have on this item.
All right, thank you, Mike. Can I get a motion for approval?
So moved.
Support.
DeYoung, Horse, any discussion?
No lift stations involved?
This was all downhill, thankfully. We just hope for bidders.
Are all the right-of-ways?
Easements are secure.
Easements are secure.
Waiting for one mortgage consent on one of them, but there's value to the property, so if they don't sign, full steam ahead. And that, there is an error on that PowerPoint, July 1st notice to proceed. Maybe, probably tell me if I'm We just hope for bidders. The market's tough. Back on those last 2 paving jobs too. That's why the alley would give the 2 alternates. We're in everybody's, they're booked up and the out-of-towners don't want to travel. So, and this one, of course, will attract the big guys from the market. The big ones. Hopefully.
All right. Anything else? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Reindeerhorn.
Yes.
DeAnstruck.
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Spore.
Yes.
Motion passed. Moving on, ordinance number 1009, entitled an ordinance amending the city code of the City of Pella, Iowa by adopting a new section 41.14 relating to indecent exposure or conduct. This is the second reading. Mike?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Once again, I'd like to refer everyone's attention to the big board for a brief presentation on this item. As Mayor DeWart stated, this particular ordinance, proposed ordinance rather, deals with indecent exposure on this. And generally, as council is aware, we've held a couple work sessions on this item. The ordinance that is being presented this evening is reflective of those discussions that we did discuss during our work sessions. Generally, the easiest way to explain this is nudity laws in Iowa generally pertain to pubic and genital areas. And as a result of what is being proposed this evening is an ordinance that would regulate human buttocks and nipples of female breast. Now, it is important to note that numerous cities, in Iowa have adopted similar ordinances. In this particular case, any violation of the nudity portion of this ordinance would be subject to city municipal infraction, which would be punishable by a $250 fine for the first offense. In summary, Mr. Mayor, staff is recommending approval of this indecent exposure / conduct ordinance as proposed this evening.
All right. And motion for approval?
Move to set aside the rules and place on third and final reading.
We probably need a motion
But
for
first.
approval.
Approval first.
Yes. Branderhorst.
Yes.
Second. Hopkins. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Reindeerhorst.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Spore.
Yes.
DeYoung.
I still have trouble with the derriere part. No.
DeAnstruck.
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Now I will move to set aside the rules and place on third and final reading.
There's support. Support. So Branderhorst, Hopkins to set aside the third reading. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Reindeerhorst.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Spore.
Yes.
DeYoung.
No.
DeAnstruck.
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Move to adopt.
Okay, Branderhorst, Hopkins, any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Reindeerhorst.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Spore. Yes. DeYoung.
No.
DeAnstruck.
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Motion passed. Ordinance number 1012, entitled an ordinance amending the city code of the City of Pella, Iowa, for the purpose of adding a new chapter 39, establishing a city ambulance service. This is the first reading.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd be happy to explain this item for those following at home. On slide number 25 this evening, as Mayor DeWart stated, this proposed ordinance deals with the city ambulance service and would actually add the ambulance under the city code. It's very important to note that the ordinance is very similar to the ordinance that was presented and discussed by council on May 3rd, and as a result of those discussions, we were directed to present this for formal consideration this evening. Some of the highlights of the proposed ordinance include, when we talked about the ordinance and you talked about the operation of the ordinance, it would be under the supervision of the ambulance chief, who would report to the city administrator. It's equally important to note that the ordinance creates a temporary advisory board which would be to oversee the transition of the ambulance service. Transition, we anticipate the target date for beginning city ambulance services would be July 1st of this year. So when we look at the transition period, it'd really be through the end of this year. So the temporary ordinance or the temporary advisory board would be through December 31st of this year. 6 members would be appointed by the mayor, and they would be subject to council approval as well. Let's go ahead, please, Randy. Now, as far as service outside the city limits, we had an in-depth discussion on May 3rd on this item. What this ordinance authorizes is the service to continue to serve areas outside of the city's corporate limits. The time limits for that is December 31st, 2022. After that date, it's very important to note that any area serviced outside the city limits would need to have an agreement approved by the Pella City Council as well. Now, as far as the fees for the ambulance service, the fees would be established through a resolution that would be adopted by the Pella City Council, and the fees would be required to cover the service's operating costs. Now, in summary, Mr. Mayor, we are recommending approval of the ordinance this evening, which would add a new city code chapter, which would establish the city ambulance service. And with that, I'm more than happy to answer any questions the mayor and council may have on this item.
Thank you, Mike. Can I get a motion for approval?
Support.
Bandstra, Branderhorst, discussion?
I guess the only thing I'd like to maybe keep open, not to change it, is maybe in December, whether that temporary advisory board should be permanent. You know, that we may make it very similar to Jeanette's group with that advisory board. If we don't think it's helpful, no sense having another board where we have to look at volunteers, but I just think maybe that Greg can add in on that too when we get to that point, but I think that would be worth looking at, whether we should have that, if we can remember to discuss that in December.
We will mark it down. Yes.
And, the advisory, or the suggestion was the current board, right, to remain as the advisory. Is there 6 members of that?
Yep.
Okay.
Going forward, what will happen if the patient's Medicare or insurance coverage can't cover the cost, the fee that's applied?
What's that now?
Going forward, what happens if the patient can't, through whatever support, can't cover the fee that would be charged?
That happens currently. I mean, like Medicare and Medicaid, they currently don't reimburse us for what we're losing money on those. Blue Cross Blue Shield, we currently charge the minimums. There are a lot of other services that charge more because it costs more to operate. So you can go after the recovery of those fees for those. But there are laws that we can't go after Medicaid, anything that's above what they reimburse.
So we can set realistic fees, but we won't necessarily collect them.
Exactly.
And as far as city policy, this is outside of ambulance services, is we don't waive any fees. We go through collection processes for fees that are owed to the city of Pella. So we believe, and just as a side note, next council meeting, I believe, is scheduled for June 7th. It's going to be a heavy dose of ambulance at that meeting as well. So we'll make sure that we cover the uncollectible portion of what we intend or what we're proposing to do for those fees that would be private insurance paid that aren't necessarily enough to cover the cost of our service.
Because there are people that just do not have the resources.
Well, I'm sure you're probably thinking, or referring to private pay, that we can't collect, but I don't know if the insurance company will handle a municipality any different than a nonprofit or not. But either way, they try to pay as little as possible.
Yeah. The insurance company won't necessarily handle us any different than what they handle with theirs. I think the key question is what the insurance pays, and there's still a balance left over. We would anticipate that we would still try to collect that from the patient. That's what we do for other very similar services. But that discussion will be scheduled for June 7th, and that's just a small portion of items that we'll be talking about on June 7th. So.
All right, any other questions? So I know there was some time was of the essence for a July 1, so I don't know, is there any need to speed this process here?
This is on our schedule. It just, maybe this will help make your decision. On June 7th, you should have a proposed asset transfer agreement that we'll be reviewing for the council from the Pella Ambulance Service. That's one of the key items that we talked about. We will have an in-depth financial review of the ambulance service. We'll also have a policy issue on the personnel and the transition of the employees over to the City of Pella. And I'm probably forgetting some other big ones that we have on the 7th as well. So the 7th is a pretty big meeting. We've set the timeline for this ordinance to be done by the last reading will be on June 21st, which we believe would be in time for a July 1st deadline if it did go to 3 readings on it as well. So,
Any of those other items that you mentioned, does it hurt if the ordinance is passed before those other discussion points come up?
let me just forgive me. I want to make sure in the ordinance, and I believe it's in there, but I believe that we do have a condition in the ordinance that talks about the with the ordinance is, we would recommend just passing the first reading tonight. With it, we believe we still have time, and if council would like to consider waiving the remaining third reading on the 7th, that would be all right. But as looking in here, and I think we're still okay, because as far as the service is concerned, one of the key items that we have two really big items on this. We have the ordinance that we're considering this evening. The other item is the asset transfer agreement. So that's the agreement that would transfer the assets from the Pella Community Ambulance to the City of Pella. And along with that goes hand in hand is the financial impact that we've been using estimates up to this point. We hope to have refined estimates on June 7th. So I don't believe passing the ordinance would necessarily change council's position on it, but it may be wise to consider everything a more in-depth review on June 7th.
I just know we're meeting that deadline, and I'd rather have more days on the good side than on, because also if we make a motion to adopt, it still has to be published then too, doesn't it? So.
Yeah, I don't believe if we did want to pass the ordinance, I think we still could pass the ordinance, but equally important to note is that we will be required to have an asset transfer agreement as well. So.
Okay, so we'll vote on the motion for approval of the ordinance. All in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeAnstruck?
Yes.
Reindeerst?
Yes.
Carlstone?
Yes.
Hopkins?
Yes.
Score? Yes. DeYoung?
Yes.
Motion passed. Okay, we move on to abstract of bills, number 2103. Can I get a motion for approval?
Move to approve and issue warrants.
Support.
Brander, Horst, DeYoung. Any discussion, questions? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Reindeerst?
Yes.
DeYoung?
Yes.
DeAnstruck?
Yes.
Carlstone?
Yes.
Hopkins?
Yes.
Score? Yes.
Motion passed. Council, anyone have any other business you would like to be addressed tonight?
I just want to be thankful for the great tulip time that we had and all the volunteers that came. I understand why we end tulip time now with the community worship service. It's to thank the good Lord it's over. They mentioned there's 4,000 volunteers involved in everything, not only in those days, but also all before. So I guess as a council member, I just can't thank the volunteers enough that really give tirelessly to this effort.
And then the following Wednesday after tulip time, I was invited to the awards ceremony at the high school, and we had 45 students give, if I remember right, 6,400 hours of community service during their 4 years of high school. They were recognized for distinguished. So the timing was kind of cool. That it's come out of tulip time, which you mentioned, all the volunteers, and then to recognize these 45 high school seniors for 6,400 hours of service to the community. It was interesting. The requirements, one of them was you can't count household duties at home.
No unpacking the dishwasher.
No, it had to be community service. Okay, do any members of the public have any other business that you would like to address council with tonight? If so, please come to the podium, state your name and address, try to limit your comments to 3 minutes. Okay, then we will move into a policy and planning session. We have one item, city-owned property, which could be transitioned for private use. Mike?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and for those following at home, I'm on slide number 28 tonight. I want to state at the outset, we're talking about 3 potential properties, and we've received inquiries from citizens, elected officials on these properties, and these are properties that could potentially be transitioned to private use. And what we intend to discuss tonight is generally the process that we would use to transition into private use. And I would state at the onset, if council chooses to proceed with transitioning any of these properties that we're going to discuss this evening, we will come back with a schedule with the departments as when they can fit it in for workloads and on this as well. So ultimately, we're looking at direction if these properties should be transitioned to private use. If the feeling is they are, then we'll come back with the schedule identifying the time frame for transitioning as well. So the first item that we have, and we do have a better map of these items, but generally, it's the area located along Washington Street, Hazel Street. There's an area that is, as far as utilities are concerned, we used to have a substation on that particular site. That substation has been removed. Now, a portion of this property could be developed. Now, when we say could be developed on this site, there may be other things that may inhibit development on the property as well, but theoretically, the property could be transitioned at the Washington Street and Hazel Street intersection. Similarly, we have another residential substation located on 708 Monroe Street. It's that middle picture up there as well. That property theoretically could be developed, transitioned to private ownership on this as well. There are utility easements on the site that may make development on that particular property challenging. The last one that we have is actually next to the Second Christian Reformed Church. It's the old, I think, youth house for Second Christian Reformed Church at 606 Union Street as well. And so with that, Mandy, let's go ahead and show the map of each one of these properties. Hazel Street, again, when we look at the Hazel Street intersection, here you have the yellow highlighted area that you have right up in here. 708 Monroe Street is located right here, and 606 Union Street will be over here. And Mandy, I think before we start entertaining questions on each one of these sites, let's go ahead and talk about our process that we would use to transition these properties. So basically, what's required under city code, if the city council were to sell these, and this is a generally 50,000 foot elevation overview on it, selling this city property requires that we would set and hold a public hearing and we would take bids. Now, it doesn't necessarily require taking a bid, but that's been always our practice whenever you sell city property. Generally, with the exception of public right-of-way, then what we've always offered is the abutting property owners on any type of vacated right-of-way. In these cases, when you talk about selling city property, we would definitely recommend taking of bids, and then ultimately, city council, through a public hearing process, would approve the sales transaction. That's an overly simplistic view on each one of these. Each one of these has, I would say, items that we would be potentially expand that general process on it as well. We'll pick them off one at a time. So let's go ahead and talk about the Washington Street, Hazel Street intersection. Mandy, if you could show the map, please, for us. We have this general area here that we've done a preliminary review, and it does appear that there could be redevelopment options on there as well. We have also had a developer that has contacted us with interest in the property on this. And generally on things, when you look at potential options on this, what the city could do in a project like this, if we're looking at any type of redevelopment or housing, additional housing on it, the city could simply say with this that we're looking for developers to submit proposals for this site. We would have developers submit the proposals, they'd outline their proposals, we would review the proposals, and then once we were able to identify a proposal, that's when you start the public hearing process on it as well. If we're looking at, and let me back up, if we're looking at just selling the property, that's when you would advertise the property, take bids, you'd go do the public hearing, and you would make, and at that time, you would either accept the bid or not at the public hearing. If you're looking to develop the property into, let's just say for an example, a housing development, that's something that you may want to say with the developers and put out an RFP and say we're requesting proposals for development options and have developers submit proposals for us. It's kind of a more elongated process, and it really depends on what council's wishes are on the property. And so with that, Jerry, is there any additional comments on what the comp plan has for this particular site or what could happen? And I'd also like to get Denny's input on some of the items as well. So go ahead, Jerry.
Right, we're currently zoned R3 for that property. So as an R3 zone, it would be a multifamily type housing, townhomes, something like that. If a developer was to take it and build, of course, they can always ask for a zone change to change it to something else depending on what the project would be.
Just two things come to mind. Access will be extremely restricted, possibly only from the south. If any of you are through there 3 times a day, it's horrible. There's a visibility problem even during normal times on Vermeer Road. The other thing, sewer is accessible, but it seems like it was 200-300 feet to the east. So there's a little sewer project that would go with that. You know, if it was one house, that'd be one thing, but if it goes to multiple.
Across the road, sewer access across the road?
No, I believe it's down Vermeer
Just
Road.
down
Down from was
on
on
that
the
side
town,
of the road.
on the south side, I believe.
There's a big electrical transformer or something there too, right? Is that what's out of that corner there?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
still there.
Yeah.
I thought Jeanette might want that to have a big tulip garden as people come into town.
Bell Park. For little dogs.
Are we ever gonna consider like a roundabout at that intersection?
It's been suggested.
Or light.
That's
You're allowed to
something.
purchase 3 houses. That's what it takes. If it wants to knock on their door in the evening and talk about it. That's not right away I want to be involved in.
Yeah. Well, I just get nervous if that, just because the traffic is an issue and as we continue to get bigger, it's only gonna get worse, especially during like key hours of the day. So I just get a little bit nervous about developing that with if we're gonna need to do something from a traffic perspective.
Probably lights at a minimum need to go there. Twice a day, it's really busy.
Yeah, about 20 minutes, 30 minutes.
I love roundabouts. Would be a nice spot for it.
Right?
Well, I think, personally, ask for suggestions from developers. I think it's a opportunity to help our housing crunch. I think it'd be a good spot for, knowing some of the limitations with access, but there's that stub street in there from the south, so it's not that big of a deal. You certainly couldn't access out on Revere Road, that's for sure. But
Certainly, I like taking a posture of being friendly to developers.
Yeah.
I think the RFP is a great idea.
Encourage it.
Trying to welcome new ideas and new energy here. It's a good chunk of property to do that in versus a single lot. Are we specifically just on Washington at this point?
Right now, yeah, we'll move on to the next two here very shortly.
Does anybody object to that? Getting ideas from developer?
Okay. All right, let's skip over to 606 Union Street, and that is the youth house that we have. There has been interest by various parties wanting to move the house to other available lots within the city on it as well. With 606 Union Street, and Denny helped me out on this when we've done these in the past. We've solicited bids, and Corey as well, we've solicited bids for the homes based on my memory on it. As a part of that, the developers required, or we call them developers, the applicants required to move the house. We established when the house would need to be moved and the time periods for the house. Now, I'm probably going out on a limb, and it's just myself that is stating this, but one of the critical items that we would like to impose, and I just want to make sure council's aware, when someone wants to move a house within the city on it, one of the items that we've had issues in the past is when houses require transmission lines to be taken down. It used to be a public safety issue for us, having people's power out for an elongated period of time. So one of the items that we would strongly recommend, or at least I've done informally, is anyone that wants to move a house, we've made the standard is we want to see all routes, not necessarily the cheapest one, but the ones that avoid taking down power lines on that as well. And I won't go into any further detail on it other than it's a public safety issue from our standpoint. If something goes wrong with the house move, it could lead to some unintended consequences, and it's a very bad experience from the electric utility standpoint. So that's something that we would do a strong review on that. And I just want to make that known up front when we talk about house moves, particularly city house moves, is we'd want to make sure we looked at routes and seeing if there's routes that they could take that they don't necessarily have to that would require shutting off someone's power to move the house. So, but this would be a very similar process. We'd solicit bids for the house. We'd also establish what the property would have to be backfilled and taken care of and restored as a part of the sale process, but we would solicit bids and that would be all established, and that's how we would envision this project would go on. But as far as the bid process, we'd want to take a look at the routes that they would actually move this house and where they're going to and what that would require from the city as well.
Could you put that in the bid conditions, that they have to provide all that stuff with the bid?
I would strongly recommend it, that we be transparent, especially on a city project, that we would want to make sure they knew what they're getting into, and that there's going to be a very heavily scrutinized review of any type of house move that requires a power dislocation, power disruptions for our customers.
It is just a story and a half, so that upstairs is pretty tight. It's not as bad as some of the 2 stories we've moved. Maybe part of that would be to measure and see how it compares, to see if it even affects power lines. It sets up on a hill, so it seems like it's all but, that hill's like 6 feet, I believe, up on that mountain.
Just the house, not the plot.
Just the house.
Be a good way to get rid of it, but, what, I assume all utility, I mean, there's no use for it now, right? Just sitting there.
It's empty. The furnace is the same age as the house. I believe that was the 30s. So somebody mentioned renting it out, and that, I think there was problems with the water service too.
Fine, see if somebody.
If we can, Mark, before it's mentioned infilling, if we could infill another city lot with that, I think that'd be a win-win for this community.
Like the one at 708 Monroe.
Not sure that's a buildable lot.
That's, if Nate Spurgeon's on the phone, there's some issues. I believe that used to be a residential a residential substation site. We've removed that from the site, but there's still some electrical utilities in there, and there's also easement that may make building a house prohibitive on the site. This may be a property, if we did put it to sale, it may be something where an adjoining property owner would be interested in expanding their yard, usable space for their
And
yard.
its highest and best use
Yeah.
is parking for the funeral home.
Could very well be, could very well be.
And we actually need to keep more right of way there along the road than it's shown too. That's that narrow right of way to start with. And so we need to chop off another 10, 15 feet, not let it go with the property.
Going back to the Union neighborhood there, something that's been rattling around in my head is using what was the Reader property as a site for public restrooms. We seem to struggle coming up with a place for public restrooms.
That would be the grassy area just to the east of our parking lot over here.
Behind us.
Gotcha.
Well, at some point we'll have to address a plan for that site where the church is. But if we could, if someone wants to move the house out of there, that would be a start to clear that line. I mean, eventually we're probably gonna clear it. But maybe a way to get that part of it done.
That's just a liability sitting there now.
Yes. I actually have two demo bids on my desk, or on my shelf. They've been here a while.
Move it or demo?
Demo. Tear it down over, fill the hole.
Yeah, see if anybody's interested in moving it. If not, go back to Denny's demo bids.
What we'll do at the staff level, Mr. Mayor, is it sounds like there's interest in all 3 of these properties. We'll come back, I'll work with the individual department heads that's over the site. Some of them, like the Washington Street, Hazel Street, it'll be a collection of department heads. We'll come back with a schedule and an action plan on each one of these items here in the near future on it as well. But I'll have a definite timeline and action plan for each one of them, if that works.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yep, thanks for doing that.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Master Hopkins, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Dan Strack,
Yes.